Let's talk about the judicial branch and separation of powers. Reminder: the intention of this major concept, separation of powers, is to prevent tyranny, abuse of power. The idea was to give each branch of government a main job, a main power, and then pit these three branches of government against each other to cause conflict so that government would have to have some serious consensus before taking any action. Of course, here we're assuming the action is good for the people if there's this much consent. All right, so the main job of the judicial branch is to settle conflicts that arise under federal law and to interpret the law. If we go back to that convention of 1787 and we read what was written afterwards, it is obvious that there was great conflict at that time, even over whether we should have a national court system. Under the Articles of Confederation, there was no national court. Conflicts that arose between the states were settled in a not so great way. Some of those conflicts just festered and festered until they got very serious. There was no way at all to settle conflicts at the national level, so there were delegates at the convention that believed a national court was absolutely necessary. Then there were the other Americans at that time who seriously opposed a national court. They believed that a national court system would, over time, seize authority and invade state responsibilities. This group, the group that opposed the national courts, you guessed it, were those anti-federalists. They really believed that a U.S. Supreme Court, as time passed, would make decisions that had the effect of weakening state power. Now, the Anti-Federalists were not for state power's sake. The Anti-Federalists believed that state government, being closer to the people, was government that would better protect the people's freedoms, and that also was government that the people could reach out and address more easily if things got out of control. So the Anti-Federalists believed that more power should be at the state level, like it had been under the Articles of Confederation. Eventually that summer, a compromise was reached. Much of our Constitution actually is a compromise between two groups. These two groups would be the group that wanted a national court system to deal with these kinds of conflicts, and the group that opposed it, believing that a national court would interfere with the people's freedom. The compromise was this, and you can read the compromise yourself in Article 3. Article 3 of the Constitution being the article that creates the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's all it did. That is the compromise. Article 3 creates one court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and then left it to Congress to create as the Constitution says, other inferior courts. By other inferior courts, they're just referring to the courts that are less than, below, in other words, the U.S. Supreme Court. So the compromise, one court in the Constitution, then the elected branch of government, the Congress, would create the other inferior courts. The belief, of course, that Congress, being elected by the people and the states at that time, the U.S. Senate was elected originally by the state legislatures, the belief that this elected branch would be more cautious at creating too much in the way of other inferior courts. Another issue that's important for us to discuss before we leave this topic is where in the Constitution we find the U.S. Supreme Court. It's Article 3. The founders truly believed that the courts would not amount to much. that we had nothing to fear from the court, as Alexander Hamilton famously wrote in one of the Federalist Papers. Hence, it's the third branch. Article 1 being the dominant branch of government, according to the founders, Congress. Article 2, we wanted an energetic and vigorous presidency, the presidency in Article 2. And then Article 3, the least dangerous branch found in the U.S. Supreme Court. So 1, 2, 3, Articles 1, 2, 3, Congress, the President, and the courts, the least dangerous branch, the federal courts there in Article 3. So that's it.